for coming to my podcast.
Yeah, I love it.
Thanks for saying yes, because as my title says, we're gonna be talking about not the fun stuff that you went through. So opening that part of your story,
hmm
opening that part of your journey is not something easy, something that we are, eagerly sharing all the
hmm
time. So thank you for saying yes and letting us, welcoming us into your journey and sharing that experience with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So would you want to tell us about yourself? I know you're an amazing, very renowned producer and an amazing mom, and you live in Hawaii. Can you tell
Yeah,
us more about yourself?
yeah. So my background is in TV production. I was a producer, director, and writer for Unscripted, aka like reality TV and digital content.
Oh,
And then once I had kids, I did not and could not keep up with the travel and the crazy hours. So I started my own business where I help small businesses and entrepreneurs use video to connect with their audience and create content that doesn't take a ton of time. And in a few years ago, I think it was like 3 years now, we moved to Hawaii and we've been here ever since.
you're living in paradise. Everybody wants to go to Hawaii, and you're living there. I see your stories of you surfing and you walking around the beautiful sceneries, and I'm always so jealous.
It's hard to complain about anything. Like some days I'll be like, oh, and I'm like, I can't complain. I can't complain.
Yeah, I was saying that we do have reasons to complain, but sometimes we compare our complaints to other people's problem, and then we say, "Oh, I shouldn't complain." But
Yeah, that's true.
in life, we do have issues, problems, things that we should complain, vent, that it doesn't make it smaller just because we live in a perfect environment, right?
That is really true. And you know what? It's so funny that you say that because I think about that a lot where people are like, oh my God, you live there. It's got to be so amazing. I'm like, yes, it is. But you also don't know what else is going on behind the scenes. You and I have talked
Exactly.
about, I've got a kiddo with special needs. There's a lot that goes on, for parents that have kiddos with special needs. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that
Mhm.
people don't see. So when they're like, oh, it must be amazing, must be paradise all the time. There's aspects of it that are, but then there's also everybody's got their own stuff. Everyone's got their
Yeah.
own stuff in life.
And you don't live in a resort where you can go
Right.
you're where you can go to the beach all the time. You don't have to work. Like you have a life and a business and children
Yeah.
and yourself, like as an imperfect human dealing with everyday things. So it's not vacation. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have things to complain, and it's valid that you complain about it.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
But I'm still very jealous that you live in Hawaii. But I also lived in a city, in a little town where a lot of people came to camp. And they always say, "Oh, you live by the lake. It must be amazing that you have this all the greenery and the lake." And I go, "I never go to the lake.
Isn't
I
that
have a
funny?
life."
Yeah. You got things to do. You got work to do. You got kids. You're busy. Yeah. It's always that. Like,
Yes.
even when I lived in Los Angeles in the beginning, when I first moved there, because I'm from the Midwest, I
Mm,
would be like, oh my God, who doesn't go to the beach all the time? And then slowly work creeps in, you get busy, and like months go by and you haven't gone to the beach. So I totally get it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. What made you move to Hawaii?
Mainly my husband loves to surf. That was the biggest thing. And then it was closer. His family would come over from Taiwan a lot to help us with our kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a little bit closer. And it was kind of always his dream to move here. And I'm pretty flexible. Um,
Yeah.
like I moved from Chicago to the West Coast. I just keep moving west. But during the pandemic, it was like, okay, we both worked in television production, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just such an eye-opening like period for I think a lot of people where we realized we don't have to be in the city that we work in. So we both were like, all right, let's test it out. And I mean, we're still testing it out. I think we're pretty solid here. But we just realized like we don't have to be in a specific city for work anymore.
So do you both work remote?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I like
Yeah.
that response when you said you moved to Hawaii because your husband likes to surf. That is like the epitome of what flexibility of a wife could be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think It would be different if like I loved LA or like had to be somewhere, but I'm pretty laid back when it comes to that. And I love to surf too, not to his extent, and I'm not as good at all. But I love that lifestyle. I also just like the surf lifestyle. It's super chill. Like I loved LA for the chaos and the competitiveness for a period of my life. Like when
Mhm.
you're in the entertainment industry, it is cutthroat, it's very competitive. And I loved that for a good portion of my life. And I think the older I'm getting, the more my focus is changing onto my kids. I sort of just wanted a little bit less of that vibe and more of a community, which is really big here. Community and family is really important to Native Hawaiians, and I love that. I love that vibe here. So that just kind of fit where I am in my life today.
It sounds like you are not just flexible, but very easily adaptable.
Yes, yeah. I think I've always had to be though, because in that comes to sort of one of my biggest mess ups is my easily adaptable. I'm also a Libra, so
Okay.
I'm like always like this balance. But as a producer, your job is to be whatever you have to be in the moment to get done what you need to get done.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're super sweet, and sometimes you're like cracking, like you're like, hey, get it together. You're kind of a bitch. Like it depends on what you need for to get done for work is sort of how you need to show up. Um, and so I've always just been flexible. And the other part of producing is it's never like, even though a lot of people look at producers like they're up here, but it's like, no, the talent and the director are up here. Producers are down here just trying to get it done. Like there was no say in when I worked or where I traveled to as a producer. It was like I went where the show wanted me to go, and my schedule revolved around the talent. When is the talent available? I better make myself available. So I think I've always just had to be really flexible, and that sort of I don't know if it was like the chicken or the egg. If I've always been a flexible person, or if I
Oh,
had to
flexi.
become one for work, and that shit's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a huge strength. People resist to changes because
yeah,
it's uncomfortable, it's so new. But
yeah,
having the strength to adapt and be flexible that fast, that easily, it's a huge strength. So
yeah.
now I'm really intrigued when you said that was one of your mess ups. Like,
Oh yes.
tell.
So I love the topic so much of this podcast, and I realized I was like, okay, what's one big fuck up I've had? And I was like, I have this main through line of fuck ups that's happened throughout my whole life that bled into my career, into relationships, everything. And if I had to like give it a title, it was massive people pleaser. And
Ah,
I realized that it took over, oh my gosh, decades of my life being a people pleaser in disguise because I didn't even know I was
mhm.
doing it. And I think it started with um, when I was younger. Like I got engaged really early. I got engaged at 23 after saying for years and years and years, I never want to get married. I never want to get married. Never want to get married. Never want to get married. I also said I didn't want to have kids, and I have two amazing kids, but I just never wanted to get married. And I was on the track to, I was finishing film school and I was going to move to Los Angeles. And my boyfriend at the time proposed because he didn't want to let me go. Like, he didn't want me to move to LA without him. And so he proposed. And the day he proposed, I broke out in hives. I was kind of like, I said yes. I didn't want to tell my family and friends. I didn't want to tell, I was a bartender in college at the time. I didn't want to tell all my customers who I was like, who they knew me. I didn't want to wear my engagement ring. And all of that should have been a sign that I'm doing something I really don't want to do.
Yes.
And I
Oh my God.
loved my boyfriend. Like I loved him so much and he was my best friend. And I should have just said no. But because I didn't want to, it was like, do I say no and then the relationship is over because there's no future? Or do I just go along with it and suck it up and deal with the consequence later? And that's what I chose to do. And I say this with love because we moved to LA together. We were together for 12 years. We did get married. Um, oh my gosh, I think we got married after dating and being engaged for like 9 years. We only lasted 4 years being married. And he was my best friend, but I just should have not tried to people please other people. And I loved his family. I still love his family. I still like, he's such a good friend of mine to this day. We're still very like, we're friendly. We don't hold grudges. Um, and we were able to have conversations now where he's like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have proposed to you back then. Like, so it's all worked out, but it was just such a big chunk of my life that I wish I would have had the courage to be like, no, not right now. I don't want to do that. And so when I continued to like, that was probably like the tipping or the beginning of my people pleasing. And then I went and worked in jobs that I didn't love and like stayed at way too long because I didn't want to upset them. I didn't want to leave. They'd be like, oh my God, you're so great. Thank you for staying, or thank you for working for us, and thank you for doing this. And I kept getting accolades. And instead of being like, thank you, this isn't what I want to do, I just stayed, and I stayed at a job for 6 years. That is very unheard of in the entertainment industry. You don't stay at jobs that long. You gotta keep moving on to keep moving up. And that delayed my progress in like career growth for a really long time because I wanted to people please and just stay
Oh,
where I was. And the
don't.
other,
It
yeah,
is, this is so relatable. Every part of your story is so relatable.
well, and it's like, it's so funny that you say that because now when I see young girls, I'm in my 40s, when I see girls in their 20s who are engaged and are like, you can tell they're a little hesitant. I'm like, don't
Say
do
no.
it. I don't want to be that person, but don't do it.
Yeah, say no, say no. Yeah,
Yeah,
me
even
too.
though you probably love him and it's amazing, because in hindsight, and I don't regret anything, but if I could do it again, I would have said no and went after what I really wanted. Because then it's sort of like I put this like shield up where I've got to please everybody else, and I'm gonna I'm gonna get married and stay with this person that I love because he's my best friend. But it's probably not, maybe my soulmate. And then I'm gonna stay at this company that is good, but it's not what I really want to do. And then I started doing things where like I would take jobs that I didn't want to do, but because people would ask me to do them and I didn't want to say no. And I lived my life that way for a really long time, to the point where, of course, it all bubbled up and I had like a total meltdown. It was in my 30s where I just was like, this is my life and it doesn't feel like my life. It feels like I'm living somebody else's life. And I started getting into this pattern where I was making excuses like, oh, I want to go do this crazy job in Alaska, but I can't do that because it's not the responsible thing to do. It would upset my husband. And I would start saying no to things that I really wanted to do because
Hmm.
of how it might make other people feel. And it just all came to a head where one day I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I ended up getting a divorce. And then I ended up having to sort of like figure out who I was at a time when most people, I was in my mid 30s, I think, most people are like getting married, having kids, and doing all that stuff. And I was on the back end,
Yes.
like getting a divorce, trying to find myself, trying to figure out where I was in my career
Mm.
and do that, and trying to find my voice as a 30 something year old felt so, um, I just felt like a kid. I felt like, what am I doing? I
A
should already know all
do-over.
this. Yeah.
Having a
Yeah.
do-over. Did you feel like you lost yourself in the entire process because you were pleasing all those people? You forgot who exactly, not just who you were, but what you actually wanted for yourself, for
Yeah.
your life, your plans, even your values start changing. They
Yes,
start morphing.
absolutely. And what's crazy is throughout all of that, I found out I do want kids. I never wanted kids. I never want to get married. I found out like I actually do want kids. I just wanted them on my time with the person that I chose.
Hmm.
And then I also had a struggle where, and this didn't help. Also, I was producing, directing, and writing unscripted TV. And so a lot of times you're writing for hosts and you're writing in the host's voice.
Hmm.
Everything you do is like as if the host was saying something. And so it even came down to like, I don't even know how to write for myself. Like
Mm.
if I were to write, I started like writing blogs. And I found that when I go back to read them, it's so embarrassing. They're so not my own voice. I don't know whose voice they are, but it's like I was writing for this imaginary host on what I thought it had to sound like. And so I lost every aspect of myself, spending all this time trying to like please other people and do things for other people, that I had to really like start from scratch. And when I did, it was super scary. Um, and I'm still I think I'm forever going to be in the process. And sometimes I kick myself because I'm like, oh, I wish I would have I wish I would have started this in my 20s because I was a very much my own person and very, very like, nope, don't want to do that, don't want to do that, don't want to do that until I met my boyfriend, fiance, and then got married to him. And then I started sort of like, I don't know, not closing up a little bit, but um, just being more of what I thought people needed me to be versus, I don't care, this is who I am.
That's interesting. I feel like we lived a very similar parallel life, even the time frame. In your mid 30s, I often felt, oh my God, I'm too old for this, and I'm starting from the ground up. I'm too
Right?
old for this. I should know better, but you still don't know because you lost that huge essence of who you are and what you want to, because you've been
Yeah.
pleasing everybody. You don't know, even know how to verbalize what you
Yeah.
want and what you need and what you want for you or for people to give, because you've been giving, 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 giving.
Yeah.
And to find yourself, to navigate through that, and to learn to say, hey, this is what I want. I want to move to Alaska. I want to do a job. You feel selfish.
Yeah.
You start feeling selfish. You start feeling guilty.
Yeah. That's totally how I felt. And then the moment where like I had gotten a divorce and I was living on my own, which I'd actually never done. I went from living with my mom growing up, and then at, I don't know, early 20s, moved in with my boyfriend, who then became my husband. We moved to California. I'd always lived with someone. Like, it was the most fun part of my life. I think living on my own in my 30s with like no one to, like, I don't have to take care of anybody. I don't have to feel like I have to be home at a certain time. It was amazing. And I I know a few people that haven't done that in their life, and I so wish that for them at some point, because there is something so freeing about that, and you don't even know how amazing it is until you actually do it. But it was so fun, and I love that. But that's when I started living on my own and doing my own things. That's when I really started having like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the jobs that I want to take. This is the business I want to start. And I started really sort of like, I guess, living for myself um,
Yeah.
at
I
that
think
point.
that
Yeah.
that moment of freedom is when you actually feel, this is what makes me feel fulfilled. This is
Yeah.
this is excitement for me. This is meeting my needs first. And then you start craving that feeling. I have never lived on my own to experience that. But when I became single after separating, I had 5 years of freedom. But I had
Yeah.
children, but everything was on my terms. Like,
Yeah.
you need to place your children on your terms. It's different than placing adults and other people.
Yeah.
You can do so much with your kids and they just mold to you. So I
Yeah.
did experience that freedom. So
And you know,
I understand. I can relate to that feeling too.
yeah. Yeah. There's nothing like it. And I'm envious of it's funny because we'll never know because I can't go back. But sometimes I'm envious of people that did it in their 20s. But then I'm like, well, there's resources that I had in my 30s that they don't have in their 20s. And there's knowledge that I have in my 30s that they don't have in their 20s. So, I mean, it probably, again, going back to like, I'm a Libra, it probably balances out somehow. But I
Yes.
find that so interesting. Like, it's same with having kids. I never wanted kids my whole life. Never wanted them in my, like, you know how little kids or like teenagers are like, oh my God, I can't wait to have kids. I can't wait to be a mom. That was never me. My
Mm-mm.
20s, nope, didn't want them. Most of my 30s didn't want them. Met my husband now. And like when we met, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see having kids with him.
Oh,
And it's so weird. Like it was just a shift.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you been with them?
11 years.
11 years.
Yeah.
And your oldest kid is?
She's going to be 7. She's going to be 7 next month. And then we've got a 5-year-old.
7 and a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So you didn't have your kids right after you met him. You waited about
No.
7 years. So you had
Yeah.
that shift, but still you waited.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to like wait it out and make sure because I also, I'd had this history of like, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for
Yeah.
me? Even when we got together and then I broke up with them because I was like, wait, I need to make sure
I'm
that
doing
I
this for
really,
me.
yes, that I'm doing this for me. Because I sort of lost trust in my own decision making for a bit
Oh,
because I created such a pattern of making decisions based on what everybody else, how it would influence on or affect everybody else around me that I just was like, I need to double check that this is for me. So I'm going to break up with
Mhm.
you for a little bit, make sure that I feel like, no, this is the person I want to be with. And luckily, he was still willing and available to get back together with me after I broke up with him.
It's very interesting what you just said because I just had this aha moment of this is maybe the reason why I'm having a harder decision to make big decisions in my life. Because I
Mm,
just want to make sure, just like you say, that I'm doing this for me based on my best interests, not to please other people. So there are
yeah.
some things that in my life right now that I'm not deciding and I'm like on hold, trying to digest first. And I think you just verbalized the reason why. I'm going to think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even think I realized it either, um, until I was like telling it to you that I probably had some residualness of that, like
Yeah.
when I make decisions, because I tend to be, um, like, I tend to like, chew on things for a while before I actually commit, or like I debate quite a while before I make the decision. And I wonder if it's still like somewhere in the back of my head, I'm like, are you sure? Like, can you trust yourself to make this
Mhm.
decision? Because in the past, you made that
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah. You doubt yourself a little more, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So after being the people pleaser and making decisions in like for considering others first, now you're trying to shift that. You're
Hmm.
trying to change that. How do you feel? Doesn't it, in my experience, I started feeling selfish and guilty.
Um, I don't.
No, and that's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think like I think it's more I tiptoe now. Like I do tiptoe, like I tiptoe into things like, do I want to do this? I don't know. Should I do this? I don't know. Like I don't tend to feel selfish. I tend to still be like just apprehensive, I think,
Mm,
where I don't go full in on things. I think during the year, like when I got divorced and I was living on my own, I think I was living on my own for longer than a year, maybe a few years, I can't remember. But like during that period, I was really just like, I'm gonna do everything. And I've kind of come back to like, do I want to do this? I don't know. So I think I more so feel like a little apprehensive sometimes, or I'm just a slow decision maker, I think. Yeah, but I don't tend to feel guilt around it. I think um, if I feel guilt around anything, it's that I don't make decisions fast enough, or I don't commit fast enough, or like I don't, or I feel guilty that I didn't do things in the past. That's sort of if
mm,
I have guilt, it's usually about like past stuff that I didn't do or the way I did things.
mhm. So now that you made that shift, and I think it's very wise that you are not feeling what I'm feeling, like the selfish and the guilt and the shame, and you were able to like transition to be smarter on how you're making decisions without all that emotional baggage that I'm carrying. So for you, um, this shift or who you were in the past, what were the advantages and disadvantages? Like, why did you feel that you had to change? Why do you think that's a mistake? Because you say you don't regret anything. And I don't
Mhm.
think that true mistakes, we regret true mistakes because they teach us
Right.
so much, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's why you're not regretting any of that. But why do you think that was your mess up that you had to overcome or shift to become who you are?
Um, that's a good question. I think that I don't know. I think that had things not gone the way that they did,
Mhm.
one of two ways. My career, because I was always very career focused, all of my teens, all of my 20s, early 30s, career, 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 career. And I think had things not gone the way they would have, one of two things would have happened. One, I would have like just hustled and like my career would have just gone through the roof.
Mhm.
Or I think I would have gone back home to the Midwest with my tail between my legs and been like, I can't have it. So I think that some of the benefits are I had a partner with me who was my best friend who, was by my side. Um, while I was working in production. And, you work for shitty money and you work long hours. So I had sort of that comfort of like home in
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles. But the downside is it also held me back in, um, there's like an analogy. It's like velvet handcuffs in a way. It's like, it's too good to
Complacent.
like, yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to like, you're kind of stuck, but it's nice and cozy here. So,
Yeah.
um, so I think it's like twofold. It was like there was benefits and there was negatives to it. Um, and I think about that all the time. Like, what if? I don't know. I'd like to say that I would have been super adventurous and I just would have hustled. I think I would have done that, but I don't know. I don't know.
That's interesting. Um, because yes, when you leave home, you kind of need a home to ground yourself to propel in something, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're spending so much time and energy into grounding yourself that you can't propel. And I feel like that marriage with your best friend gave you that little home, that foundation where you could
yeah,
focus on other things without feeling like, should I go back home? This is so new. I'm still young. And if
yeah.
you go back home with your mom and dad, you don't want to be that failure either. You,
Right. Yeah. I did not want to go back home. And I was also like, what am I going to do? There's like, I didn't, going to film school is like movies and TV and like, you don't learn a lot about other things. So I was like,
yeah,
I don't have skills to do other
yeah,
things. I can
yeah,
only do entertainment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Could that have been a reason that you stayed longer too?
I'm sure. And I think also like going back to that sort of analogy of the velvet handcuffs, I use that as a weapon in a way where like I'd want to make this bold decision in my career, but then I'd be like, there were some times that I was the breadwinner in the marriage, and I would be like, no, I can't. I have to stay at the stable job because my husband at the time was an entrepreneur, and his income fluctuated, and mine was always stable because I'd had a staff job at a production company, and so I would use that as an excuse of like, well, I can't go take this crazy gig in another
Mm,
country because I have to stay at the stable job. When really, I probably could have made it work. And if I was single, I probably would have figured out a way to do it. But I use that as an excuse to sort of um, like keep myself like, small, and not do some of the adventurous things that I wanted to do, whether they be in life or just mainly at work.
yeah, like an anchor to not do
Yeah,
to get out of your comfort zone.
yeah, and it's funny because I will see remnants of that. So either that has been my personality my whole life and I don't know, or I was in that space for so long that it's just stuck. Because I will find myself these days be like, well, I can't do that because I've got two kids at home, and I can't do that because I've got the kids. And sort of, now I find that if I'm not careful, I'll sort of use being a parent as sort of an excuse on why I can't do things. And
Hmm.
I really like it's a conscious effort that I'm constantly having to break myself out of like,
Yeah,
nope, that's an excuse. That's a way that you're just trying to
yeah,
hide. Like
yeah,
you can figure out a way to make it work.
yeah. It's and they're valid reasons.
Yeah.
They're
And
valid,
like
legitimate
I can
reasons
argue
for,
it.
yes,
Yeah.
for you to stay where you're at and not get out of that comfort zone. But it's also an excuse to not do them. And it's
Yeah.
funny that you always had that legitimate reason for not doing it. So you're wanting to push through to for you to make that conscious effort to say, no, 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 this is legit,
Mhm.
real, but it's also an excuse. To
Yeah.
be able to identify that, that's amazing.
And I think I don't know that a lot of moms do that, but I know that once I became a mom, it became really easy for me to do that. And even now I'll get a call for a job. So I still date, it's called day play, where like somebody will come from a production company will come from the mainland and they'll want to film something in Hawaii. And I'll get a call to do a job. It's a day
Oh,
job. And it's usually like 10 to 12 hours. That they're long days. And I'll
okay.
be like, well, I don't know if I could do that because I've got the kids. And I'm like, I've got a husband. Like
Yeah.
I've got support. So I will have to remind myself, nope, you can do this. You don't have to use that as an excuse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm feeling that the people pleasing and then recognizing that people pleasing was one of the reasons why the mistakes started adding up as layers helped
Yeah.
you right now to identify Am I people pleasing or am I being myself? Is this an
Yeah.
excuse? Is this a valid reason? Like you grew into that ability to be really, really, like you said, you're a Libra, you're always like weighing things to see which one is better, but you grew with real skills to do that properly.
Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that because that's the answer I should have given you when you asked me, like, what do you think of, like, what is the benefit of having to go through all these fails? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was, is it sort of taught me to recognize it, to
Yes,
be able to be aware, like awareness, recognition of, like,
exactly.
is this or is it this over here? Yeah.
Yes, because we don't have that. Many of us struggle with that part, is the identifying, recognizing. We are trained to make a list of pros and cons, but not
Yeah.
everything has pros and cons. You also need to see, is it for me or is it for others? Who's this
Yeah.
beneficial for? Is it going to
Yeah.
make my life better? Is it going to serve others better? There's so much to take into the consideration, but that self-awareness that you built through it makes
Hmm.
you so skillful into actually make a decision that you're going to be happy with for the long term now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I like the way you say that. Yeah.
Because there are decisions we make that makes us happy for a year or two, and then we go like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Like
Yeah.
it's not long term.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But I think that your journey has helped you through that, like self-awareness, awareness of everything to be able to make a decision. That's a
Yeah.
skill set. Not a lot of people have that.
Huh. I don't think I thought of that. That's really interesting. Yeah. And I don't know that I would have had that had I not gone through these years and years and years and years of people pleasing and then had that like midlife crisis situation
Yeah.
where I had to like realize what was actually going on. Yeah.
Midlife crisis at
Yeah.
35. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I had the same. Yeah, and I'm still like I'm with you into navigating still who I am. Like I
Mhm.
think after I got divorced, I found a new Christina. After having children, I found a new Christina. After moving, after losing my mom, through the pandemic, owning my own business, having a new relationship and a new baby, it's like I'm discovering my new self every time
Yeah.
and navigating through that to recognize, okay, what is best for me? How do I demand or verbalize and communicate what I want when I've been trying to put myself last for the longest?
Yeah.
It's a
That's a
navigation that
skill.
it's a skill, and
Yeah.
I am I'm gonna learn from you. I was like, I think I found a mentor now. Because it's a skill that I'm working on to get.
Yeah. But you're
Oh,
doing a
that's
great job. I've been watching you and you're doing a great job.
I'm still finding myself. And like I said earlier, I feel like I'm too old. I should have done this in my 20s. But then I look at the people in their 20s like you do, and I go, oh, you're
Yeah.
such a babe. Of course I
Yeah.
didn't. You don't know what you're doing. Of course I
Oh,
didn't know what I was doing.
yeah. It's so funny. So when I was in my 20s, I've always wanted to be in my 40s. And I know that sounds insane because a lot of people dread the 40th birthday or turning 40s. I had this preconceived idea that people in their 40s, like they had their shit together. They were loving life. They were doing their thing. They didn't care what anyone thought. And so when I reached my 40s, I was looking forward to it so much. The only thing that I
Mm.
didn't get right is that we don't have it figured out. And I also learned that people in their 50s, people in their 60s, people in their 70s,
Oh,
nobody
wow.
has it fully figured out. We always think the older generations do, but once we get there, we're like, oh, no, they don't. But I will say my 40s, I definitely have like grown into this, like, I definitely feel more comfortable in my skin. I've got all these years of lessons that I've learned, but I'm still trying to figure it out. But it's way more fun now. And I think part of it is the realization of that self-awareness that makes it more fun because you realize that, oh, there is no, I gotta get up to here and have it all figured out. Like there is none of that because nobody has that.
Yeah. I learned that we all have seasons. Like,
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
will become new moms when they're toddlers. And then they hit a different stage, and we are like preschooler moms now. And that's a
Yeah.
totally different stage. You need to figure out your lingo, your routine, everything. And then they go elementary school. And then they hit puberty. That's a different stage. It's a different season that you have to become a different mom again.
Yeah.
And watching my kids grow and seeing myself morph at their stage, I also realized that, yeah, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they won't. I will never have my shit together because it's a new season every time.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
new season when you're 40s, you reach your 50, that's another season. Like the level of energy that I don't have now, that I thought I was going to have in my
Yeah.
30s, is non existent. This is a new stage for me. So
Yeah.
if I had my shit together, now I have to figure out again because the lack of energy is different. My health is different. My priorities are different. So
Yeah.
every stage we hit, we're never going to have it together.
Yeah.
And then
And I think
it's,
there's comfort in that. There's comfort
yeah,
in knowing that.
exactly. That's what I wanted to get at. And it's okay.
Yeah.
I just realized that it's okay. I'm not going to have my shit together. Like I told my kids, hey, I'm a new mom. You're hitting puberty. I don't know how to deal with your puberty. I'm a
Right.
new mom, but also that compassion that I'm asking them to have towards me,
Yeah.
I need to have it towards me too. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then realized, yeah, no, I won't have my shit together. You won't have it, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think if we can like lean into the fun of that, like I found
Mm.
like I think I got to a point where, especially having a kid with special needs, you can read all the baby books in the world
Yeah,
and
no.
they don't apply. And so once I realized that, because I read all the baby books, and then once I read them and realized, well, none of these really apply to me,
Hmm.
and there is no 100, like one size fits all with
Yeah, no.
with kids in general, actually. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, that takes the stress out of it. Similar to knowing that we're never going to have it all together. Like it takes the stress out of it. And so why not have fun with it? And that's
Mm.
sort of where I am in my life right now. It's like, let's just have fun with it.
Let's just try, make mistakes and learn from
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you go through it or you grow through it. And
Yeah.
I
That's
I
good.
decided that I want to see every moment as a precious moment of a lesson. And for the longest, I thought, oh, I don't want to be positive. That's so toxic. Trying to see the good every time is so toxic, right?
Right.
Because when you're in the midst of it, it's so hard to see the positive of it. It's just so
Yeah.
hard, right? So embracing the hard is also good, but also seeing as an opportunity of, okay, how can I better myself through this?
Hmm.
Like, how can I learn to serve others through this? And that motivation sort of shifted, and it
Mm.
helped me through when I was, seeing myself that I was again in the middle of a huge mess. And it happens. It continuously happens.
I think it's always going to happen. But I think it's just part of life where like nothing is always perfect. Nothing's going to always go as planned.
Mm-hmm.
But when we know it's always going to happen, I do this thing now. It's funny because my husband laughs at me, but like my kids will do something just so out of, I'm just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And I don't
Yes.
react right away. It's almost like, I don't know, but I pause and he's like, why are you just standing there staring?
It's
And I'm like,
mind blowing.
I'm just taking it in because this is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's mind
Yeah.
blowing.
And that's where personally for me, I have to find the humor in it and be like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Is this actually happening? Versus freaking out. And that helps me a lot.
How do you do that?
Um, I, oh gosh, I don't know how I do that. That's funny. I mean, I know in general, I'm a freak about comedy. Like I love to laugh and it's my favorite thing to do. I'm obsessed with comics. Um, I think because in the past, I'd say in the past 15 years, I had so many low points that I got scared that I would never be happy again. And so then
Mm.
what brought me up was comedy. Like anytime I was like super low, I would watch comedy. I would watch comedians. And I think now that is my go-to of like anytime anything's like really low or anything crazy happens or anytime my kid does something that's like, you've got to be kidding me. I try to find the humor in it, even if it's just like, oh my gosh, they're doing the thing they're really not supposed to do. But, in 10 years, we won't even remember it or be something that we laugh about. I try to think of those things. I try to like
Mm-hmm.
fast forward in my brain and be like, we're going to laugh about this later, even though right now it's horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
I try to think about that because just in general, I think life is kind of funny if you can pull the sort of like the traumatic experiences, sort of like separate them. It's all
Mm-hmm.
kind of quirky and funny. And I think that's helped but
Yeah.
that was never my automatic default. My automatic default was, oh my God, what's going on? And
Yeah.
I realized that that wasn't serving me. Like that
Oh.
response was stressing me out so much. And it was making me be a person that I didn't really love. So
Mm.
I think that sort of forced me to like figure out a different way to respond to things that are crazy.
You love yourself when you can enjoy things.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
I also like, I think a lot of my experience in just life in general is working with people that I don't know and haven't been around because as a producer, you're thrown
Mm-hmm.
into a crew, you're thrown onto a set with strangers and you just have to adapt. And I think what I saw a lot of times was people like sometimes the entertainment industry gets a bad rap where, you think people are yelling and screaming and being like, you know, just tyrannical on set. And I've worked with those people and I just think like there's no reason to be that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
just remember being like, I never want to be around this energy and I never want to be this energy. So
Mm-hmm.
instead, what do I want to be around? I want to be around people who like laugh at shit when it goes wrong. Cause like, what are you going to do? Yes, we'll fix it. It's kind of funny or whatever. So I just realized like that's the people I want to be around. So I want to become that type of person that I want to be around. Somebody who takes a more lighthearted approach to things.
Mm. I really, really admire that. I like Jim Rohn, and Jim Rohn talks about strong characters. And one of the strong characters that we must build is humor,
Yeah.
flexibility, and humor. Like he has 8 things, 8 chapters in a book.
Yeah.
What two of it was flexibility, which we touched earlier. You have a great sense of flexibility and
Hmm.
adaptability, but also humor. Like trying to
Yeah.
find the humor, and this speaks volumes about who you are, Don, again, and that this is why I feel like it's admirable that they go to hand in hand. When you don't
Mhm.
take your life so seriously, you find humor in it, but
Yeah.
then also you're able to adapt, you're able to be flexible, and that all comes down to being wise. Like it
Mm.
speaks of wisdom. Like people that are wise don't take themselves so seriously. They are able to
Yeah.
laugh it off and move on. They're
That's
able to
true.
adjust and move on. They're able to bend a little bit, use discernment, and move on. They don't get
Yeah.
stuck into the, oh, self pity, oh, I'm a victim, oh, everybody sucks, I blame everyone. They're just, let's move on with a
Yeah.
huge smile, with so much confidence. And like, you're painting this picture of who you are through that mistake that you made, but it made you this wise person that you are now,
Well,
right?
thank
Like
you. I hadn't looked at it that way.
you have a beautiful picture of who you are through that mistake, but those strong characters, you have it all. And now I see where your confidence comes from. Now I
Mm.
see your relaxed demeanor that you have comes from. It's it's who you are, and oh, it's admirable. I really like it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And to be able to see your story on what made you who you are today, it's very encouraging. Because like I
Thank
said,
you.
I find so much of you so relatable. I make the same mistakes, the same
It was
mistakes.
so
I just
funny. Like, what's a big mistake? I've made so many mistakes, but what's the biggest? And I was like, that big through line in my life,
yeah.
which
It,
I was like, do I share that? I don't know.
and when I ask people to open about that, they said, but I don't have one biggest mistake. And I said, it doesn't have to be one biggest mistake. To me, my if someone was to ask me what is, it's exactly what you said. is always
Mm,
putting myself last. That was the biggest mistake of my life. But it's not one pivotal moment or decision.
right.
It's the layers of and the the moments that lead up to bigger mistakes, bigger mistakes, bigger
Yeah.
mistakes that I couldn't undo because it started with the wrong button, like the
Yeah.
chain of events, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true.
And I think our life gets into this big that royal mess because of the small moments that we couldn't say
Yeah.
no, or we said yes at the wrong time. We we couldn't put ourselves first. We didn't know how to say no.
Yeah. It's like a chain reaction. Yeah.
It's a chain reaction. Yeah. And that's how we learn. And look at you, like you became who you are, and I think that was absolutely necessary. So what has been the hardest lesson for you? And it could be a lesson that you're still going through or
Yeah.
something that you overcame already, but what has been as of late, like now that you're in your mid 40s, the hardest lesson in your life that you're still learning from?
I think it's the lesson of speaking, of, of, of knowing when to speak up for myself. And this might sound funny, like you might think like, oh, you should always speak up for yourself. But sometimes I overreach and I overdo it because I'm so afraid of falling back into that old routine of people pleasing that I will speak up on things that really don't matter, that I'm just being overbearing about. And so right now it's a lesson that I'm continuously learning that like we've had to grow patient with each other in my husband and I relationship because I sometimes will be like too overbearing and thinking like I gotta speak up right now on this thing because I don't want to fall back into the spot that I was in
Mm,
before. When really, when I pull out and look at the bigger picture, it's like, no, this isn't a big deal. Like this isn't so, you're not falling back into that old pattern. I think the biggest lesson is is learning the balance of when and why to speak up for myself and trying to prevent myself from falling into that old pattern of people pleasing.
mm. There's a fine line. I feel like there's a fine line between really having boundaries or pushing boundaries because you want to make sure everybody knows that you have boundaries.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think in general, probably women in general, I think a lot are probably going through this because, if you look at the grand scheme of things and over the centuries of women and our progression, we're probably all trying to like make sure we want to make sure we set our boundaries. Or like, is this too much? Is this too much? And I think for me, just knowing my people pleasing tendencies, that's big. But I would guess on a big scale, women probably deal with that a lot more than men, maybe.
Yeah, we are. I think we became pros to, you know, walk on that tightrope,
Yeah, yeah,
and we tumble, we lose
yeah,
our balance, but we try so hard, right? We became very good.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're leaving me a lot to think of, like to reflect on myself and I see myself a lot in you, or at least that's the goal I want to reach. Like, oh, I want to be like that. I hear you and I go, oh, that's where I want to be. That's Thank you.
It's always a work in progress. I'm always a work in
Mhm.
progress. We're all always work in progress with it.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
being aware that we are work in progress and that it's okay to not be done,
yeah,
it's one of the biggest lessons that I learned, that
yeah.
I'm okay with now.
Same.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm changing. We're still growing.
yeah.
Is it ever gonna stop?
Hopefully not.
Mm. Well, thank you, Dom. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And
Me
like I
too.
said,
Thank you.
it's admirable. I want to be able to be at where you're at right now soon, and to be able to say, yeah, let's look at everything with more humor. I'm learning to do that, taking myself less seriously. And I think people need that. People need to learn that, hey, don't take yourself so seriously. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
there's so much wisdom. You need to be wise to be able to take a joke, not get offended.
yeah, yes, and not get offended. I think that's the biggest thing. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, is to just like laugh it off. Yeah,
Well, thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you so much
sharing
for
your
having me.
story and being so open about it and saying yes to my very imperfect first few recordings.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.